Well, Thursday was a rare good day for political and legal sanity, at least partially. Sure, I may not be completely thrilled with the reasoning, as we'll get to. And yes, even though the OSHA vaccine mandate on private businesses fell 6-3 at the Supreme Court, as it should have, the CMS mandate on healthcare workers was upheld 5-4, but it is certainly welcome to see at least a few degrees of sanity burning in the otherwise out-of-control D.C. dumpster fire. Of all the things to appreciate as matters of law and constitutional divisions of power in this decision, the more subtle thing to appreciate is that it's yet another demonstration that the so-called expert opinion routinely shoved in your face is propaganda that is often completely and inversely wrong. Because remember, it wasn't just Joe Biden and company giving you the line that this mandate on private businesses was completely constitutionally square and supported by legal precedent. It was their media minions too, serving their political interests with cheap and lazy disguises as truth. When Biden announced this move in the fall, Twitter posted atop their trending news section for weeks, Biden's vaccine mandate for workers is supported by legal precedents, experts say, citing that 1905 Supreme Court case of Jacobson v. Massachusetts as the obvious supporting precedent. And many media outlets parroted the same expert-approved line. Squawk, Jacobson v. Massachusetts means this mandate is obviously constitutional. Squawk, squawk, squawk. NBC's fact check has the dubious distinction of a breaking news banner about the Supreme Court striking down the mandate, hovering over their original headline that the mandate is obviously constitutional, all under the branding of think. Well, maybe if they had bothered to do that, they would have discovered the issue is plainly not simple or obvious in the direction they claimed it was. It's actually the opposite. You know what words never appear in the Supreme Court's decision on the mandate on private businesses? 1, Jacobson, and 2, Massachusetts. The case isn't cited once in the majority decision. The case isn't cited once in the concurring opinion. The case is not cited once even in the dissent writing in defense of the mandate. And that's because that case is actually procedurally irrelevant to what's happening now. It's a completely different issue and a completely different question. In the Jacobson case, the city of Cambridge had a vaccine mandate authorized under Massachusetts state law. It was not federal action. And per the 10th Amendment's preservation of unarticulated powers left to the states, Massachusetts has a constitutional authority on the matter that the federal government does not. In other words, this case was always less a question about vaccine mandates and more a question about process, a question of who gets to decide, not what they decide. But I suppose it shouldn't be surprising that these people completely overlooked process, since they never care about process anyway. They only care about outcome. Maybe they were deliberately trying to mislead, or maybe they still don't understand that we are a country where rules and process and how a decision is made are more important than what the decision is. But in fairness, that concept is very difficult to grasp. In fact, so difficult that even one of the Supreme Court justices can't comprehend it herself, as she admitted at this case's hearing last week.
You seem to be saying the states can do it, but you're saying the federal government can't. I am not sure I understand the distinction why the states would have the power, but the federal government wouldn't.
It's kind of like saying, I'm not sure I understand where you find your free speech rights or your right to bear arms, other than explicitly stated in the Bill of Rights. But whatever the reason behind this supposed inability to understand the complexities of reading the text of the Constitution, to me, that was among Thursday's bigger lessons. Not just that our government is rejecting its constitutional limitations, but that the phrase experts say very often means the facts don't. And on this topic of process versus outcome, I don't want to get too celebratory about the majority's decision in this OSHA case, because it isn't perfectly reasoned either. Like many other decisions, this one was made strategically to tailor it as narrowly as possible, rather than address the broad matters of law and principle, because of course those, if properly acknowledged, would have broader implications. The majority struck down the OSHA vaccine mandate not on the basis that the federal government has no role here, and not even on the basis that OSHA exceeded its possible authority, but instead on the basis that Congress's law establishing OSHA never explicitly delegated the authority to issue a vaccine mandate. And that's true. And I agree the statutory authority is lacking. No such law was ever passed. But that's only part of the issue. And that reasoning ignores broader important questions. What if Congress did pass such a law? What if Congress says we get to stab anybody we want to against his will? What if Congress says we get to fire you from your job whenever we want to? What if Congress says we get to slap you right across the face anytime you dare disobey us? I know there are some additional considerations with that last one, but the question I'm asking is this. Are there limitations to what Congress can do or not? Because a plain reading of the 10th Amendment says yes. Congress has explicit powers delegated by the Constitution, and those powers not expressly delegated belong to the states and to the people. Vaccine mandate authority is not a constitutionally delegated power. And sure, you can cite the Supremacy Clause and claim that federal law takes precedence over states, but that clause is subject to what? To the constitutional limitations on power. Laws in pursuance of the Constitution take precedence. Laws defying the 10th Amendment delegation of power to the states do not. Without getting too technical, I don't think that the lack of explicit congressional authorization is the strongest reason that this mandate is invalid. I think the constitutional reality that this is not the domain of the federal government, period, is the proper and the strongest argument. But of course, the court won't say that because doing so would call into question OSHA itself and all of the broader powers that the federal government has already improperly seized. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to unravel the entire bullshit sweater. They just want to pluck at this one bullshit thread. So my problem with the majority is the implication, the door left open to the idea that if only Chuck and Nancy had just a few more seats in Congress, they could fire you from your job and stab you against your will without any constitutional consideration. In a plain reading of the document, that is simply not true. But maybe I should be a little more outcome-oriented. Maybe I should appreciate this decision as closer to right than wrong and not treat the perfect as the enemy of the good. Because even if the majority's decision is flawed, perfection is not the only alternative here. Absolute insanity is another. In other words, I should probably be at least a little thankful that the dissenting third of the court didn't get anything close to a whiff of victory here. The majority at least has a nod to the rule of law, and Congress as the general authors of it. The dissent just made it up to their liking. During last week's hearing for the case, there was some subtle language from Kagan and Sotomayor in their questioning that was telling. Notice how Kagan describes the mandate. It's not a mandate, it's just a strong incentive.
So we're going to put into place the policy that we know works best, which is to strongly incentivize vaccination and to insist that unvaccinated people will wear masks.
And in case you have any doubts what she means, Sotomayor said it more explicitly. This is not a mandate.
Without some workplace rules with respect to vaccines or encouraging vaccines, because this is not a vaccine mandate.
And that's exactly the reasoning that made it into the dissent itself. The dissenting trio says the majority obscures the issue by calling it a vaccine mandate. It is not a mandate because there's a choice to test and mask instead of vaccinate. Right, because when a bully says, give me your lunch money or I'll punch you in the face, that's not bullying because there's a choice. As though it's not possible that both choices are illegitimate uses of force. But yeah, it's everyone else who's obscuring terms, not these ideologues who simply redefine them to suit their whims. And if that hypocritical accusation isn't enough, there's an even more brazen one. The dissent accuses the majority of seizing power, of taking a decision away from its proper domain and giving it to unaccountable judges with no expertise. It's a decision that should be deferred, says the dissent. Well, first of all, the majority did defer the decision to the proper decision makers, to the states, and, at least debatably, to Congress. Second, how is giving the decision to OSHA not a seizure of authority? The dissent warns that the Supreme Court isn't accountable to voters, as though OSHA is. The dissent warns of not deferring to the experts, as though OSHA knows more about running a business than the actual business owners or the workers do. The dissent warns of improperly usurping a decision that rightfully belongs to others, to conclude several pages of arguing that the rightful decision-making authority of the people should be usurped. It's the kind of hypocrisy that's just too bold to be attributed to incompetence, which is what we're supposed to do, assume stupidity, not malice. But at some point, when the bully keeps grabbing your hand and slapping your face and telling you to stop hitting yourself, you have to recognize the malice as obvious, which includes the most significant malice of this entire story, the Biden administration's malice of forcing this mandate on the American people, knowing it was illegitimate and illegal the entire time. They knew this mandate had no basis in law. They knew this mandate had no basis in the Constitution, but they did it anyway, betting that your boss would buckle to their pressure and force you to do as they demand. And even if they're wrong and they know it, they did it because they can still make it useful to their ends. Just as Biden explicitly said in the similar case of his unconstitutional eviction moratorium extension. Yeah, I know it's wrong. Yeah, I know it's illegal. But while it's tied up in the courts, I can buy some time to do it anyway, at least for a little while. They knew this was illegal the entire time they imposed it on us, but they did not care, and they forced it anyway because they knew that even when they lose in court, there is no real punishment. There is no real recourse for the people they coerce. There are no consequences for their abuse, and there is no justice for their victims. And they do not care because their only concern is how they can impose their will on you, not how they can respect and serve your will. And that is not the mentality of a public servant upholding his oath to defend your rights. That is the mentality of a bully. And bullies are not deserving of your respect, let alone your subservience. Bullies are only deserving of your scorn and mockery at best, and treatment that Susan won't let me describe in detail at worst, because they show you nothing better unless and until they're made to. Nobody ever complied his way out of a bully's abuse. Nobody ever actually paid off that lunch money debt because it's both arbitrary and infinite. Thankfully, in this case, there were those willing to take on the massive cost of refusing to do that. Beyond all the legal complexities and the propaganda here, that is the lesson of the week. If they insist on these schoolyard tactics, give them the schoolyard response. Make me. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.